Hello and welcome to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society's special live stream event from our members' room at 28 Queen Street in the heart of Edinburgh. I'm Richard Gosselin, editor of the Society's members magazine Unfiltered, and I'm delighted to be your host tonight. We're here to celebrate the launch of a new book from our founder, Pip Hills. It's called Maverick, the Founder's Tale, and it's about his whiskey-fueled adventures founding the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and no better time to celebrate it than on our 40th anniversary. So we've got a busy evening ahead. We are going to be taking questions for Pip from any of you out there who are tuned in. We're going to have a Society Superfan quiz, a competition to win a signed copy of the book, and of course, we'll be drinking some of the best whiskey on the planet. So great to see you online this evening, wherever you are. We invite you to get your questions in for Pip, put them in the comments, and we'll try and get through as many as possible through the course of the evening. Whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, then drop the question into the comments, and we'll pick those up as we go along. Give us a shout out from wherever you are. Let us know what's in your glass. Let us know how you're doing. And if you're watching on catch up, then welcome to all of you as well. But first, let me introduce our special guest for this evening, the one and the only Pip Hills, a well-known name and face to everyone at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, the founder of the society that we know and love. And as I said, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary with Pip's new book, Maverick, the Founder's Tale. How are you doing, Pip?
I'm very well indeed, thank you.
Good stuff. Very nice to see you.
I have any reason.
Good. I should say the book is now available. It's on SMWS.com. You can order your copy there. It should be available through various branches of the society, wherever you are around the world, and it's available with different orders. So if you spend enough money on whiskey, I think you may well get a book along with your whiskey. We've got a competition tonight. We've got 5 copies of the book, which Pip is going to sign, and we will send those to the winners. To enter the competition, you just need to send an email to unfiltered@smws.com with the subject line Maverick Giveaway. You've got to be a member of the society, put your name and your membership number in the email. That competition's open until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, British summertime. We'll pick out 5 winners, and we will let you know on Monday if you have been a lucky winner. Right, we've got a lot to get through. Pip, I'd like to get the ball rolling, but we'll hear from our members with more questions. But first of all, can you tell us what we can expect from the new edition of the book?
Oh, well, it was actually you that prompted it, if you remember. I should explain to everyone that when I came back to the society after 20 odd years away from it, I found that there were lots of stories circulating, some of which involved me, and practically all of which were not true, and worse, which were mostly pretty boring. So
the ultimate sin.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, if you've got an outfit like the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, you don't have to put up with boring stories. So I was pissed off with this, so decided, why don't I tell some of the true stories? Now, when telling stories like this, it's always a temptation to embellish them, just to tweak them here and there. But I thought, if I'm writing these stories because they are the true stories, I'm not allowed to do that, or at least I'm not allowing myself to do that. So I wrote The Founder's Tale, and I think I can vouch for every word of it. It's all true. It's not some marketing puff dreamed up by an executive in a whiskey company. So it was published by Berlin, Edinburgh's, Scotland's leading publisher, and they seemed happy with it, and the members seemed happy with it. And time passed, and Richard suggested to me, you suggested, Richard, that I should write something for Unfiltered magazine, describing what it was like to come back to the society after so long a wait.
Mhm.
And I said, yes, that's fine. I've no problem about doing that. So I started writing it, and it got longer because it was more complicated. In in order simply to tell the story properly, I had to bring in quite a lot of things. So yeah, I think if you recall, I sent you a draft and I sent a draft to Rebecca, our marketing director, and you both said, well, that's a bit too long for Unfiltered.
Yeah.
But it was I don't know whose idea it was. The idea arose that perhaps we should use this for a new edition of the book.
Yeah. Okay. And that's what we've got updated, and some very nice pictures from through the years. The young Pip devising some schemes about the foundation of the society. Maybe I'll kick off with a question, because I've just seen Rebecca, you just mentioned. Well, maybe a bit of a risky one. Rebecca's asking, what was the wildest moment from the early days that you can tell us about? Any memories of
that's
particularly the wild moments?
Very subjective judgment. I mean, I said in my chapter about coming back to the society, I related that the stories of the wild doings of the society had been related to the writer of a previous piece by our cleaner, Susie. Now, I liked Susie fine, but Susie's ideas of what were wild doings and my ideas of wild doings were very different. And in fact, Susie never knew much about anything that went on. No, there were some good times. Hijinks, I suppose you'd describe them.
Yeah.
But I think in the book I have told all the stories that I can tell in decency, in consideration for the people involved, and in consideration for the force of the law. And really, I think I've probably told all that I did.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe there's another version.
I'm quite old, but I would quite like to live a bit longer, and I don't want to worry about knives in my back because I've told something that I shouldn't have done.
Okay. We've got a question from Alex Moores in Australia, which he wanted to ask, how many casks did the original syndicate get through before the decision was made to formally bottle cask 1.1? And any surrounding stories about when the iconic green bottles and labels were first introduced?
That's fairly easy. We only got through 3 casks before we started the society. We had the first cask for the original syndicate, which I brought down from Glenfarclas. And all the members went off, each with a gallon of whiskey. And I thought that was the end of the thing. I thought I would hear no more about it. But within a few weeks, members of the syndicate were ringing me up saying, look, that's great whiskey and my friends all think it's wonderful. And I'm starting running low. Can we get some more? And I would say to them, no, we're not getting more. No, no, I'm not going to go all that bother again. But also, the friends would give drams to their friends, and the friends of the friends would say, what wonderful whiskey, where can I get it? And the friends would say, well, you get it if you're a member of the syndicate, ring Pip up. And perfect strangers would ring me up and say, look, you don't know me, but I'm a friend of so-and-so who's a member of your syndicate. Can I join? And I said, well, as far as I was concerned, it wasn't an ongoing syndicate, but I'll take your name and your phone number. So eventually, so many names had accumulated that I called a meeting of the syndicate members and I said, look guys, all the pals want to join and want me to get more whiskey. And the syndicate all said, oh, that's fine. Let's double the size of the syndicate. And I said, that's fine, but I don't know if I can get any more whiskey. I mean, I've only ever got one cask of whiskey in my life, and I didn't expect to have to try and get any more.
Uh-huh.
Um, they said, "Oh, that's fine. You fix it." I suppose I should have been touched at their confidence, but I said, "Okay, I'll try." So I phoned up Glenfarclas and said, "Look, is there any chance of 2 more of these sherry quarters?" And they said, "No, you can only have one a year," because what I had done was to inherit a dead man's family supply. Some guy had died and left no one to inherit his annual cask of Glenfarclas. And Glenfarclas said, "Well, we can let you have 2 more, but they will be a 9-year-old and an 8-year-old. That's to say, next year's cask and the year after. But beyond that, we won't sell them to you because they're too young." So I said, "Okay, let's have those." So I went up with the trailer behind the gondola and brought back 2 casks. And the syndicate, the enlarged syndicate, met, and they all gave drams to their friends, and all their friends rang me up. So I ended up being in a position where I suppose I had a couple of hundred names of people who wanted to join this syndicate. And it was at that point that I thought the only way of dealing with this and of getting some peace was to suggest to the syndicate that we actually set up a company and do it properly. And that's when I called another meeting of the syndicate and I said, "Right, guys, this is the plan. We're going to set up a company and we're going to go in business. And you're all going to have to put up cash. I'll put up cash as well. We all put up equal shares and we'll set up a company." And they said, "Fine. What shall we call the company?" And I said, "We'll call it the Scotch Malt Whisky Society." And they all said, "Oh, that's fine. That sounds like a good name." There was a problem, and the problem was with my lawyer, who said, "I'm not sure the registrar of companies will let you have a name like that, because they won't let you have a company name that implies anything of national significance." But he said, "I'll try." So a few days later, a very nice lady phoned me up and said she was from the registrar of companies. And she would like to ask me what reason I could give for having a company with a grand name such as the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And I said, "Well, we are a Scotch Malt Whisky Society," and I explained what it was about. And I said, "As far as I know, there aren't any other Scotch Malt Whisky Societies. So I see no reason why you shouldn't let us have the name." And she said, "Oh, that sounds reasonable."
Yeah.
And we got the name.
Okay. I've got questions to get through. Let's go to Craig. Now, Craig works in our relatively recently opened warehouse in
Yes, I met
Huddingston.
Craig.
You met Craig. Craig's question, bit of a boring one, but I don't think it's boring because everything matters in the whiskey process. And obviously, this is of interest to Craig because he works in a bottling line. But how did you bottle the casks at the start of the syndicate?
Oh, that was very simple. I was far thinking. I bought a whole lot of glass gallon jars. At that time, there was a fashion among men, not much among women, for making your own beer.
Mhm.
So you could buy gallon glass jars. And I bought the length of plastic piping.
Okay.
And when we got the cask up the stairs into our house in Scotland Street, I had an ancient device which was actually a doctor's weighing seat, and about which there is a long story which I won't go into. And we mounted the cask on that, and we knocked the bung out, and we siphoned some out with a plastic pipe, and we put it in glasses, and we all tried it. And I said, "Well, guys, is it good enough?" And they all said, "Yes, it's pretty good. Shall we have another one just to make sure?" And that's how we did it. There was no great science to it.
Well, you've brought us back to the origins of the society, and the bottle in front of us is a throwback to, I suppose, what it was, the lemonade bottle, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That the farmer Stan would bring over and share with you and your friends up in the farm in Aberdeenshire. So this is a special release for our 40th anniversary. It just says distillery number 1, because that's where it all began, the distillery on Speyside. We're now up to cask number 284 from distillery number 1. So the 284th bottling from that distillery that the Society has done. That's 284. We've got a sister bottle, 1285, and that's what we're drinking tonight. We've got a question from First Phil 59 asking, how close in flavour is this bottling to the one that you shared with Stan? Can you think back to...
No chance. It's impossible to say. I think there are some people who can retain in their memory what things tasted like. I can't.
But the same kind of cask.
Except to say that it was 3 or 4 years ago, somebody produced a bottle of 1.1.
Yes.
And
we
shared
opened it
and we shared it out, and we all thought it was nice. And I thought it was lovely whiskey. There's no question about that. I mean, it was good enough whiskey to launch the society. But on tasting it, now it may be that my nose isn't what it used to be 40 years ago, but I thought that it wasn't as good as I expected it to be. And I've been thinking about this for a while, and I reckon the reason is that, if anything, mature malt whiskey today is better than it was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Because people pay more attention to the cask and to the maturation.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Glenfarclas has changed in the slightest.
Yeah.
They do everything the way they have always done. But my impression is that this stuff is, at the very least, as good as the original whiskey was, and possibly better.
Okay. We have a question from Max, who's asking, how did it feel when you had the first 10 distilleries under the society's, in the society's fold? So did you ever think the SMWS would expand to well over 100 after you had the first 10 distilleries lined up? I suppose it's like, at what point did you think, oh, we've really got something here which has got arms and legs and could potentially grow, and now we're up to 155, 156 in terms of the number of bottlings? But at what point did you think this is going to take off?
That's a more difficult question than it looks. Firstly, because it needs me to remember what I was thinking 40 years ago. And there's not many of us can remember what they were thinking 40 years ago. I should say right from the outset that we weren't doing it out of ambition. We were doing it for fun.
Yeah.
And while I, for one, had no doubt at all that the thing would work and that we would, in a sense, conquer the world, but it wasn't done out of any ambition of that sort. And so I, at least, had no expectation of where it was going to go. It was very much, it was a fun thing to do. Everybody who was involved seemed to like it a lot. So why shouldn't we just continue doing it?
Yeah.
And that's how it evolved. And I have to say that one of the things that I like about the society 40 years ago on is that sense of fun, of people enjoying it. And I'm not just talking about enjoying the drink, which is most enjoyable, but enjoying everything that goes with it. And that's very much part of the spirit of the society, and it makes me very happy.
Yeah, and nice to see that it hasn't changed from what it started out as.
It's about human contact and about people coming together in good fellowship over some very good drink.
Excellent. Okay, another question. David Manson is asking if you have any favourite distillery and dram.
Absolutely not.
Okay, I won't pursue that. John McChain, who you know,
Yes, of course.
Master Brand Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, he's asking to tell us about the tasting panel and Hamish Henderson. I think we're going to save that one, right?
Okay.
We'll come back to that. Don't worry, John. We're going to come back to that one. Let me see. Max is asking if you could choose one number from the SMWS distilleries, which one would be your favorite and which one would be the one you enjoyed the most? Or maybe they're both even the same. Can you?
No, I couldn't. Absolutely couldn't. I think what matters is the cask.
Yeah.
And the distillery is not nearly so important.
Yeah.
I would rather have a good cask from a not very distinguished distillery than a bad cask from a distinguished one.
Okay, very good. This is another familiar face to you. This is a video question that came in from Tom Smith, who is the director of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in the US. So let's hear what Tom has to say.
Hello, Pip, and hello, everyone who's tuned in. This is Tom Smith from the United States chapter of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and I'll have the distinct pleasure and honor hosting Pip next month in the States. But today I do have a question for you, sir. So this is a kind of a two-parter and of a maritime nature. You're an avid sailor, and you mentioned a couple of times some adventures sailing in the Founder's Tale. I wonder, can you share with us today your craziest, wildest adventure on the high seas? And as a kind of a second part, what whiskey would you take with you if you had to be dramming while on this adventure on the high seas? So I look forward to your answer. I look forward to hosting you soon.
Okay, we couldn't hear that, but Tom was asking about any whiskey-related adventures. He knows that you have been a very passionate sailor through the course of your life. So any whiskey adventures, the craziest stuff that's happened on a boat over the years?
Well, there were lots of hijinks, and they mostly involved whiskey, and of course at the time they almost all involved society whiskey. At the time, in the early years of the society, I had a very splendid boat called the Kaminomichi. She was a Japanese name, and she had been built in 1908 for an officer in the British Navy who had spent a lot of time in Japan, helping the Japanese to build up their navy so that they could kill Russians. I inherited this boat through some friends of mine, and she was a splendid thing. She was 50 odd feet long, weighed about 25 tons, and she had a big Gardner diesel. And I once took her through the Gulf of Corryvreckan on the flood. Now, as you know, Richard, the Gulf of Corryvreckan is a narrow channel of the sea in the Inner Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland. And it is the most powerful tide race in the Northern Hemisphere, as far as I know. I believe it's even, at a flood tide, it's even stronger than the Maelstrom in Norway. And it's a fearsome place. And I was on it with one of my chums. And it was a beautiful day, and we decided to go and look, just to go into the entrance of the Gulf and see what it was like. And we decided to have a dram as we went in, just to fortify ourselves in case it should be hairy. And we did, and it was lovely. And I remember drinking a glass of society whiskey on board the Cami on this beautiful day. And just at that moment, the tide race gripped us and spun 25 tons of boat round us, though it was a cock. And I got my tide times wrong. We were on a flood tide of a spring tide, and the Gulf of Corryvreckan goes outwards on the flood. Very perverse sort of thing. And this thing sucked us in and spat us out the other side. And on the way in, there was a wall of water, and it looks like a wall when you see it. And we were halfway up this wall of water, and I thought the boat was going to fall off the wall because it was so steep. We decided that if we were going to drown, we might as well have another drown, which we did. And by that time, the boat had got to the top of the wall, and it just spat us out. And we got into fairly calm water, and we looked to the north, and we saw another tide race called the Grey Dogs, just off the west coast of Scarborough. And we thought, do we want to do this again? And we thought, no, certainly not. And we went the long way around. It took about a day and a half. I'm sorry, that's not much of a story.
That is
certainly the most hair-raising thing I have ever done in connection with society.
always good stories. A couple of quick ones that came in from our members before the live stream. They emailed in. Sertug, writing from Turkey, asks, have you ever thrown away any casks during the lifespan of the society because the whiskey just wasn't right?
Oh, no, not at all. For the very good reason that was that we would never buy it unless it was good. We don't buy these things blind. We ask for samples, and we only buy casks of which we have samples. In the old days, I used to go to distilleries and bonded warehouses where brokers had their stock, and they would line the casks up, and they would start the bound and draw a sample from each of them, and I would go along the casks and I would say, yes, I have this one and this one and that one, but not those. And we only picked the best.
Yeah, it was easy to get hold of good whiskey back in those days.
Oh, the place was awash with it. The distillers had all this stuff, the brokers had it, and didn't have a market for it, so we could buy it, the very best.
Yeah. Gareth, who's a member in Leicester, messaged to ask what your experiences have been with really terrible, toe-curlingly bad whiskies. He refers to George's Marvellous Medicine territory, which I think is a Roald Dahl reference. He says he had a 1970s bottle of Hague Dimple that tasted like an electrical fire, so it went down the plug hole, and a bottle of Taguchi Premium Blended Whiskey, and that also went down the drain. Any toe-curlingly bad whiskies that you remember?
No,
Certainly not in society territory here.
I can't, honestly, certainly no society whiskies.
Of course not.
All the society whiskies are up to scratch. I've drunk some drams that are not all they might be, but no, there aren't any. I simply cannot remember anything that I would say, this is really horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you what really horrible whiskey tastes like. It was on another boat of mine on Loch Craig Nish. Me and my chum Joe Nichol took it down on the engine, and the engine was getting air in the fuel, and it would stop from time to time, and I had to suck the diesel oil through, and to get it started again. And after a while, I was feeling very sick, having sucked diesel 2 or 3 times, and decided that the only thing to do after having a mouthful of diesel oil was to have a mouthful of whiskey. And I can tell you, in case anyone is tempted to try it, it's not a good mixture, but it's pretty horrible. But that is I think the only occasion on which I could say that I drank. I didn't drink it, I just rinsed my mouth with it and spat it out, but it was horrible.
Okay, I'll take one more question from Max. He's asking about the cask and its influence. Do you have a favourite type of cask? Sherry, bourbon, virgin oak, and others? And for the style, do you generally prefer peated or unpeated whiskey?
Peated simple. Peated is simple. I don't like heavily peated whiskey. I think the phenolics just overwhelm everything else. And I think by and large, the peated aromas, with a lightly peated whiskey, the nose will accommodate to the peatiness and in order to allow you to see perceive the floral aromas underneath the peat and which are caused by the peat. But with very heavily peated whiskies, that doesn't do it for me at all. What was the other part of the question?
Just if there was any particular kind of cask that you prefer
No,
for maturation?
I wouldn't say it. It's a matter of judgment.
Yeah.
Which the people bottling the society's cask have to make. In that, I've had sherry cask whiskies which are too old, and I mean, I'm talking about 16, 17-year-old whiskies which should have been bottled 5 years before.
Yeah.
So, the best sherry cask whiskey, if it's left too long in the cask, won't be nice to drink. I don't particularly like very young whiskies, but having said that, I'll drink quite young bourbon cask whiskies because I think the influence of bourbon comes through. But saying this again, Dean, the barman at the
legendary Dean.
Yes, at the vault, poured me a 17-year-old bourbon just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he just said, "Try this, Pip," and I had to try it, and it was absolutely miraculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pop luck, really.
Yeah, well, you have to keep trying.
Yeah, you just keep trying.
Right, time's moving along, so I thought we'd do a little quiz to find out who's a real society super fan out there. So I'm going to bring this in. It is multiple choice. Anyone who joined our pub sessions during the various lockdowns might remember this format. We get 10 questions, multiple choice. If you're taking part, you can put your answers into the comments and we'll see how we're doing and we'll answer the questions as we go along, and Pip can add some stories as we progress. So Society Superfan Quiz, let's go. Question number 1, Pip's whiskey epiphany took place when he visited friends in which part of Scotland? We've already given some of these answers away tonight, so it shouldn't be too hard if anyone's been paying attention. Was it A, Aberdeenshire, B, Speyside, C, Islay, or D, Campbelltown? Right. Craig is straight off the mark there with Aberdeenshire, no messing around. Let's see if anyone else is going to have a go. John's saying B for Speyside. Helge is B for Speyside. So, yeah, some other A's coming in. Okay. But the answer is, of course, Aberdeenshire. And we were up there. I had the pleasure of going back up to Aberdeenshire to the farm where all this happened, and there was a lemonade bottle with whiskey from distillery number 1 to revisit that and tell that part of the story. So back to the farm in Aberdeenshire.
Well, the people who said Speyside can be forgiven because, of course, the whiskey came from Speyside, but it was in Aberdeenshire.
Yeah.
I met it first.
Tricky wee question, actually. Question 2, what make of car did Pip use to transport single cask whiskey from Speyside back to Edinburgh to share with his friends? And you've also mentioned this tonight. So was it A, an Aston Martin, B, a Bentley, C, Jaguar, or D, a Lagonda? So let's see who's quick off the mark with this one. Okay, Craig's fast on the trigger. Straight in with D. Everyone's going D. Yeah, it seems to be fairly unanimous. There's Chesterville coming in with D. Very good. Yeah, the answer is, of course, Lagonda. We've got a picture of you reunited with the car, which was lovely. I think that was actually, well, it was a gathering event, maybe 2019. How did that feel to be reunited with the old car?
It was interesting. I didn't feel as sentimental as I might have done.
Yeah.
But hey, my feeling was of awe at the amount of money that must have been spent on it.
Yeah, it was looking good.
Because I drove it for 25 years and then sold it. And because it needed an enormous amount of work done with it. And it is now absolutely perfect.
Yeah,
And I have to say that I would have felt awkward driving it looking like that because it is so flash.
yes,
Whereas when I drove it, it was flash, there's no doubt about that, but it was mostly dirty.
yeah,
And people would occasionally look at it and say, what a disgrace having such a beautiful car that hasn't been washed for a month. And I would just shrug my shoulders.
well, it did the job getting the casks down from
And it was fun to
Speyside.
drive.
Yeah. Question 3. What company did Pip buy the vaults from after walking up the stairs one day in Leith to find out if it might be for sale? Was it Coburn and Company, J.G. Thompson, Pattison Brothers, or Robertson, Sanderson and Company? Right? David's straight off the mark with B. John Brady's saying B. Max is B. Got some Society super fans out there.
Oh, well, the word must have got it.
Yeah. Well, if anyone knows, the Artisanal Spirits Company does have a business called J.G. Thompson. So it's no great surprise, I suppose, that J.G. Thompson is the correct answer. Any memories of that day, Pip? You walked up the stairs?
Yes, well, it was like the rest of the society. I was just winging it. And nobody ever lost by being bold. And I had admired the building from afar. It's a very grand building. It was very scruff in those days, as was the rest of Leith. But I thought, it's a nice looking building. That would suit me fine. Why don't I go and ask? So I went up the stairs and there's a nice woman receptionist. I explained what it was about and she said, oh, I'd better go and get one of our directors. And she brought this very nice man in a 3-piece suit with a gold watch chain. That's what businessmen used to look like. And he was called John Walters and he was very affable. And he said, well, it's curious you should ask. We're moving to modern premises in a month's time. And if you made an offer, any reasonable offer, I'm sure the directors would be delighted.
Unbelievable.
So I went to members of my syndicate and said, guys, anybody want to buy a building?
Yeah.
So 5 of us came together. And one of the syndicate, Benjamin Tyndall, well-known Scottish architect, was the architect on the job. And indeed, Ben, just last week, or the week before, gave me a booklet of his 40 years as an architect. And what I did, I have only realized on reading this, was that this was one of Ben's very earliest jobs. And it was an enormous job for a young architect to take on. But we have to thank Ben.
Yeah, well, anyone who's been to the vaults knows what a special place it is. It's getting a little bit of TLC at the moment and will be reopening in September. So looking forward to that. Question 4, which poet who served on an early tasting panel for the Society was stumped for words when they first took part in a tasting? Was it A, Hamish Henderson, B, Liz Lochhead, was it C, Norman McCaig, or was it D, Hugh McDermott? So again, I think we've maybe given this away, but see what you think. Which poet was stumped for words when they first tasted a sample for the Society on the tasting panel? Okay, we've got A coming in, C for Norman McCaig, but the majority seem to be going for A. Max is going for C. The answer, of course, is Hamish Henderson. And you knew him, Pip, quite a character, but he couldn't quite find the words to a
He-
poet
he-
couldn't find the words.
He
to-
was a wonderful guy. He's not generally known to the public because he never publicised himself. But here, when the first Scottish Parliament in several hundred years was opened, the song they sang at the opening was one of Hamish's songs. He was a very good poet, a scholar, and a soldier. And in the Maverick book, I managed to find a picture of Hamish as a leader of the partisans behind German lines in Italy. And there is a picture of Hamish and his chums giving what anyone who knows about these things will recognize as the communist salute, because all the partisans were communists, which caused a lot of trouble for the Americans, for the Allies generally, as they advanced through Italy. But they did the job, and Hamish was just amazing. He was, to my mind, probably the most important single figure in the Renaissance of Scottish culture, and included in that is Scotch whisky, in the last 100 years. Hamish was a folklorist, and he was one of the originators of what became a folk song movement in the 60s and 70s, and which was absolutely seminal in creating a national consciousness in Scotland, which had not been present before. And he was a great man. And I thought, since Hamish is a poet of real distinction, when we had the first tasting committee, which met in the kitchen of my house in Scotland Street, and I assembled some of my chums, and they had to be people, obviously, who knew and liked whisky, but they also preferably had to be literate and preferably literary. And I asked Hamish if he would come along. And Hamish, I'm sorry to say, was a complete washout, because I gave him a glass of malt and he looked at it and I said, "Now, Hamish," and I explained, I said, "I want you to taste this whiskey. You have to nose it first and then to taste it, and then describe it in whatever poetical terms come to mind." And Hamish did as he was told. And I said, after he'd had a sip of whiskey, I said, "Well, Hamish, how would you describe it?" And he said, "Oh, it's a lovely whiskey, just a lovely whiskey." And I said, "Yes, tell me more." Oh, he said, "There's nothing more really to be said." He said, "This is just about a perfect whiskey. I cannot imagine a lovelier whiskey than this." And I said, "Tell me more, Hamish." And he said, "Well, if it was a pipe tune, I would have described it as a peacock," which was the highest commendation Hamish could give it. Now, I won't explain to everyone on this what a peacock was. You can look it up.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it is just a lovely whiskey.
Yeah.
We don't need more words than that. Okay, question 5. What did Pip cook as a meal for the Wall Street Journal writer Paul Levy following a trip around several distilleries? Pheasant with whiskey sauce, homemade haggis, Highland cow, or roadkill stew? Okay, so maybe this is a trickier one. We've not actually referenced this tonight. We'll see who are the super fans out there that know the answer to this. What did Pip serve to the journalist Paul Levy following a trip to several distilleries? Anyone going to have a go? John's in there straight away with D.
Mm-hmm.
Michael's D. Max is D. Max is B. He thinks she made some homemade haggis. Craig's going with the haggis as well. Nederland D. Gert is D. So most of them going for roadkill stew. So the answer is roadkill stew.
Obviously, most of you have read the original Founder's Tale book. But for those who haven't, I should explain that we had decided early on that if the whiskey was as good as we thought it was, we wouldn't need to advertise it. People would come and find us. So we said no paid for advertising. But there was nothing to stop us getting people to write about us in newspapers, as long as we didn't have to pay for it. And so I set that as my job, and for most of my time at society, that was my main function, was to get us press publicity. And I think you'll agree, Richard, that nobody ever got press coverage like that.
Yeah.
So when we decided to take it to America, I looked up and I found that the Wall Street Journal was a very influential paper in America. And its food and wine writer was a guy called Paul Levy, who was Oxford educated and rather difficult, shall we say, not an easy guy to convince. And I rang this chap up and suggested that he might like to come and see what we were doing, and he agreed to. And gradually the idea arose that I should take them on a tour around distilleries. So Paul came up to Edinburgh with the cameraman. And I thought, how am I going to feed these guys? What am I going to give them? Because I knew that if anything was less than perfect, our chances of getting anything out of Paul were pretty slim. Very critical, very honest sort of person, but not easy. So I thought, the first evening in Edinburgh, where shall I take them for dinner? Now, Edinburgh even then, had a lot of swanky restaurants. But I thought none of that would do. And I knew where I should take them. I took them to Cushie's Indian Restaurant on Drummond Street. Now, Cushie's Restaurant was set up by Mr. and Mrs. Cushie in 1947 to cater for students from the Indian subcontinent who were coming to Edinburgh to study medicine. It was originally in Lothian Street and shifted down to Drummond Street. And it was the kind of place where the tables had formica tops and the benches had no cushions. And you ordered from a very short menu, and Mrs. Cushie slung the hash from behind the counter. And it was as basic as an Indian restaurant could be. And Paul thought it was absolutely fabulous, because I knew it was. It was just great cooking. I still go there from time to time. I took them to the society, to the vaults, and they liked that. And then the next day, we got in the Lagonda to go up to Speyside. And it was quite early in the year, it was about April. And I put the Lagonda's heater, I should explain, was terrible, and it had drafts, and it was cold. So generally, when I took my two little daughters to visit their grandparents, I sat them in the back seat and I covered them with a traveling rug, out of when I don't know. But it was a large piece of blue felt onto which was sewn the skin of a black bear.
Okay.
And I could see that Paul and his photographer thought this was strange, to be settled in the back seat and covered with a black bear skin. However, they were quite happy. And we drove north, and it was a lovely day. And north of Abbey Moor, I drew very rapidly to a halt. And they looked alarmed. And they said, "What's up?" And I said, "Back in a minute," and got out and ran back down the road. Came back up with a dead hare, a big one. And it was early enough in the year, it was still white, it had its winter clothing on. And Paul said, "What are you going to do with that?" And I said, it was still warm and had been hit by the car before us. And I said, "I don't know, but it's too good to leave on the road." So I chucked it in the boot. We went up, we visited one or two distilleries. And on the way down the A95 on Speyside, I drew up again. Paul said, "More roadkill?" I said, "Yes, wait a minute." Came back with two pheasants, chucked them into the boot. So we got back to Edinburgh, and for their final evening in Scotland, I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do, guys. I'll make you a roadkill stew." And I skinned the hare and plucked the pheasants. And I bought a couple of pounds of belly pork from my friendly butcher, Sandy Crombie. And I got some herbs and vegetables, and I made a roadkill stew. And Paul said afterwards, he wrote almost a full page about us in the Wall Street Journal. But he did say afterwards, he said, I thought the whole thing was a scam. I thought it was just a front for a pretty ordinary exercise in marketing whiskey. He said, the thing that convinced me was the roadkill stew. He said, nobody could have made that up.
The story of the roadkill stew. Okay, let's move on. Question 6. Women have played a key role in the Society's history. Who was the first managing director? Was it Anne Dana? Was it Anne Griffiths? Was it C, Annabel Meikle? Or was it D, Denise Nielsen? So Anne Dana, Anne Griffiths, Annabel Meikle, or Denise Nielsen, who was the Society's first managing director after our foundation back in 1983. John's in again with A, Craig's in with A, going with Anne Dana. Anyone else going to have a go? Max is going B for Anne Griffiths. David A, Steve B. Okay, the answer is Anne Dana, and that's a recent picture of Anne because we caught up with her this year. It was in March, and my colleague Mads took over the reins of Unfiltered, and it was devoted to women in the whisky industry, and Anne played a really instrumental role in the Society's early days, didn't she?
Absolutely. I mean, it was she who ran the thing in the first instance. I mean, my managerial skills are practically zero. I never had any. It was always obvious that I was never going to manage the thing. But it's a curious story because at the time I was running a curious business as a very unorthodox tax accountant, which I did from my house in Scotland Street. And I needed a secretary, and I advertised for a secretary. And I got a really nice lady to whom I gave the job. I had no regrets. But another lady had applied for the job, and she came to see me, and I thought she was just great. And we sat on the sofa drinking a cup of coffee, and I explained, I said, look, I have already filled the job that I advertised, but I have a scheme in mind, and it's going to need somebody to run it and hold it together. It's not going to be easy. Would you be interested? She said, yes, what is it? So I described it, and I explained that we had formed this company, that we had bought this crazy building in Leith, and that as soon as it was habitable, and by habitable, I don't mean what any person who paid any attention to health and safety would consider habitable. I mean, it was a building site. But Anne went right in there, and right from the beginning, she was the person who ran it. All the other ladies you mentioned were involved in running the society, but it was Anne who made it work, and it was a curious combination. First of all, she is very good-looking lady. Now, I'll take stick from any of my feminist friends and relatives. If we had put somebody in that position who, in the old Scots phrase, looked like the side of a hoose, it wouldn't have worked nearly so well, because all these old guys wanted to come to the society, not just because of the whiskey, but because of this lovely woman, because of her charm, because of her good Scots voice, because of her obvious honesty, and the fact that she had the whole thing at her fingertips, and she was just brilliant.
Great. Okay. We owe a great debt of thanks to Anne Dana as well. Back to some of the coverage that you generated in the early days of the Society. Question 7. Which American playwright wrote a feature about the SMWS for Playboy magazine, would you believe it or not, after his visit to the vaults? Was it A, David Mamet, B, Joyce Carol Oates, C, Neil Simon, or D, Aaron Sorkin? All great writers. But which one of those wrote a feature for Playboy? I think it went over several pages in Playboy
It
magazine,
was
didn't
about
it?
5 pages, as I recall.
Yeah. And of course, some people only bought Playboy for the articles, right? So what have we got? John is going for A. Helga is A. Nederland A. Definitely super fans out there. No messing around. Steve is going for A as well. The answer is David Mamet. How did David Mamet end up writing about the Society for Playboy?
Well, my then wife Leslie is a film producer. She makes films that get shown at film festivals and things. Her partner in her business was a guy called Trevor, and Trevor's sister was David Mamet's wife.
Okay.
And David came to Edinburgh from time to time. And he was a bit bored, apparently. And I don't know who it was who suggested they were obviously at a loss. The Mammoths had come to stay for a week or so. And they thought, what can we do with them to keep them amused? And I don't know who it was who suggested it. I think it was maybe Leslie who suggested, why don't you take him down to the Whisky Society? Now, David likes good whisky. And it just happened that at the time we had a meeting of the tasting committee scheduled. Oh, that's a good idea. So there was due to be a meeting of the tasting committee. So I said, well, why don't we ask him down when the tasting committee is on? Now, the tasting committee at the time had as its members my dear friend Ian Duffy, who isn't mentioned much, but Ian was a stalwart throughout all the early days and all the times of trouble. And he was just an excellent and dear friend, and he was also absolutely brilliant and one of the best talkers you ever met in all your days. And I could spend all night telling you stories about Ian. He was such a good guy. But also on the tasting committee at the time was David Dykes. Now, David was an Edinburgh, David was one of these many people who managed to maintain several conceptions of their nationality. David was an Edinburgh national and a Scottish national, and he was also a Jew.
Okay.
And he found no conflict at all in all of these things, which is not altogether surprising because over the last 400 or 500 years, a large part of the Scottish population has thought they were descending from Jews. And they long thought they were the lost tribe of Israel, and that's why they were so keen on the Old Testament. But David was the man who wrote the best book about Scotch whisky, published in 1968. He was the man who, more than anyone else, caused the revolution in malt whiskies. And he was just a lovely guy, and he was a scholar and a poet, and lots of fun to be about. So I thought I cannot go wrong with this. So David came to the tasting committee, and if ever I saw a meeting of minds, it was David with the other David and with Ian, and they just got on famously.
Okay, that's great.
He had a great time, and David Mamet is a very, very smart guy.
Yeah.
And I suspect he is a guy who is so smart that he very rarely has the privilege of chatting over whiskey with people who are as smart as he is.
Okay.
but there were at least two of us there that night who were, and he loved it.
Brilliant.
And he rang me up sometime later and said, Pip, that was a great visit. I was thinking of writing about it. And I said, oh, that's nice, David. What were you thinking of writing? Well, he said, I reckon Playboy would take an article. And I said, well, it's not what I see as our target market. Being a bit of a snob in those days, still am. But it was exactly the right demographic for the society. People had a lot of fun. And okay, so that was the section of men who liked having a lot of fun looking at pictures of ladies, which has never been my thing. I've always liked real ladies to pictures of ladies. But it was a huge success.
Yeah.
And it brought us a huge surge of men. Between that and Paul
The Wall
being
Street
the
Journal.
Wall Street Journal,
Yeah.
it just lifted the American society off the ground.
Yeah. Okay. Question 8. Where did Pip leave an offering of a society bottling at a temple to the island's local god known as John Froome? Right. So was it A, Easter Island, Rapa Nui, B, Fiji, C, Papua New Guinea, that should say, a wee spelling mistake, and D, Vanuatu. So where did Pip leave an offering of a society of whiskey at a temple to the island's local god who was known as John Froome? David's straight in with D. Anyone else having a go? John says if Aaron Sorkin visited, what a wonderful play he could have written. He wrote Lagavulin into the West Wing, but wasn't Aaron Sorkin. Craig's going for Easter Island. Max is going for Vanuatu. Anyone else going to have a go? Yeah, Michael's going for D. So the consensus seems to be Vanuatu. How do you end up without the live stream going on all night? But how do you end up on the island, one of the islands of Vanuatu, leaving an offering to a god called John Froome?
Well, this is a long story and it has many parts to it. I will try and condense it. First of all, Vanuatu isn't an island; it's a chain of islands,
Yep.
which used to be called the New Hebrides, and it was colonized in the 19th century by various evil people who took away a lot of the locals for slaves, and it has a horrific history. The amazing thing is that the people who now live in it harbor remarkably few grudges against the Europeans and Americans who colonized them. But it's now known as Vanuatu. And my dear departed friend, Dick Morton, Professor Morton, bizarre character and absolute delight. Dick was a guy whose eccentricities most people can't even imagine. I kind of spent an entire evening just telling stories about Dick. He was a highfalutin scientist. He was a geneticist. He was a friend of the Cuban revolutionaries in the 1960s in his capacity as a geneticist, and he helped them breed pigs. He was a Cambridge Don with a swanky fellowship at Cambridge, which he gave up because he thought it wasn't really suitable. A totally extraordinary guy. He lived with my sister for about 20 years. And when he lived with my sister Marion, I called him my common-law brother-in-law. After Marion left him, when he got his face tattooed in Papua New Guinea, that's another story, I referred to him as my former common-law brother-in-law. And I remember taking him into the Grunton Tap, and the lads were very rough pub. were very impressed because where they had tattoos on their biceps, Dick had them on his face. Anyway, Dick bought, and his son by his first wife, Danny, bought a plantation on Efate, the principal island in the Vanuatu chain. And round about, must have been about 1990 or thereabouts, I decided to pay him a visit on Vanuatu. And I travelled light. I took a satchel that I could sling over my shoulder, which had all that I had of clothes and things. And I took a flight case that would carry a dozen bottles of Society whiskey. And I could carry the two as hand baggage. And I got a plane from Edinburgh to London, and from London to Newark, from Newark to Honolulu, Honolulu to Sydney, Sydney to Brisbane, and Brisbane 3 hours by jet across the Pacific to Vanuatu. So as you can imagine, it's kind of a remote sort of place. And the islands are strung out over, I think, about 10 degrees of latitude. And the southernmost one of them is Tanna, where there is a big volcano. And I had long wanted to stand on a volcano, and Dick arranged for us to go. And we went on what used to be called a tramp steamer. That's to say, it's a steamer that took 2 or 3 days to get there. Our accommodation was a pile of rope on the deck, and we shared the deck with some large ladies and a lot of hens and a lot of pigs. And we got to Tanna, where we were welcomed by a man called John Numaki. And everybody called him Chief John. And I said, John, what are you chief of? And remember, we're talking here Bislama, which is like pidgin English.
Okay.
And I remember he made a grand gesture. He swept his arm on and said, I'm chief of Tanna. And John was the big chief. And Dick had explained that we wanted to see a volcano. And Chief John took us to the volcano. And we climbed the volcano. It took us about 3 hours. And I stood on the edge of this volcano, looking down at a pool of lava 2,000 feet below me that was having little eruptions and throwing lava up 1,000 feet. Still 1,000 feet below us, and the whole mountain would tremble. Anyway, Tanna has no harbour, and then was a very remote island. I think it probably still is. And in the last days of the Second World War, when the Americans were building up to the Great Assault on Guadalcanal, their main supply base was in the Solomons, and they supplied them by ship and by air. And one day, a B-32 cargo plane got into trouble over Vanuatu, and it had to crash land in the jungle. And they managed to land in reasonably good condition, and the aircraft didn't break up completely. That was, of course, a write-off. And all the locals, most of whom had never seen a flight net, gathered round to watch to see what would happen. And a door on this aircraft opened, and a man appeared. And the man looked down at the assembled people and said, "Hiya, guys, I'm John. I'm John from America." And the plane was laden with stores for the PX, which was the American military stores, and it was full of cigarettes and whiskey. And that stuff wasn't going anywhere, so the crew distributed it amongst the locals. And gradually there grew up the myth. Everybody knew that a man called John had come from America, and he had brought whiskey and Hershey bars, and they were all free. And gradually a religion grew up, as religions do. And once a generation or so had passed and people's memories had become vague, there grew up the idea that there would be a second coming. And one day, John would come. John from America would come, and there would be more free whiskey and free Hershey bars. So they built a temple. They assumed he was obviously a god. That's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah.
Lots of people around here make far less reasonable assumptions about their religion, and they built him a temple. And this temple, the temple was built of pandanus leaves, as most of the houses are on pandanus, and lovely material it is. And they decorated it with anything that they could think of that was related to the PX stores that had come out of this area.
Okay.
So I remember a particularly fine illustration from Life magazine of a bulldozer, a yellow bulldozer that was pinned up in John Crom's temple. And there were all sorts of it, lots of Hershey bar wrappers,
Yeah.
empty, whiskey bottles, empty.
Yeah.
And
So you left
our
the
last
society
bottle
bottle.
of society whiskey we took as a present for Chief Tom on Tanner, and we gave it to him. And he gathered his people round, and we all drank it, and we all got very drunk, which was helped by the local intoxicant, which is a curious herb called my memory fails. It's a splendid narcotic herb, which doesn't travel, so nobody need worry about anybody getting addicted to it. And we all had a great time, and Chief Tom ceremonially placed the society bottle of whiskey in a position of pride.
Okay.
And I have no doubt that for generations after it, Vanuatuans have worshipped at the shrine of John from.
Yeah, and the society whiskey bottle is probably still there. Quite a story. Okay, we better get through the rest of this quiz. Which book did Pip write following his departure from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in the 1990s? So was it A, Appreciating Whisky, B, Scots on Scotch, C, the Scotch Whisky Directory, or D, the Star Drive? So you've written several books over the years, but which one of these did you write after you left the society?
In the 90s, I think I wrote Appreciating Whisky more or less directly after I left the society in the 90s. So probably the right answer would be Appreciating Whisky. But shortly after that, I had the idea that it would be possible to create a completely objective analysis of the flavors of whiskies.
Well, I'll give the answer first. The answer is
It's definitely Appreciating
you're
Whisky.
right, but you should know. You wrote Appreciating Whisky, and then you went on to do
The Scotch Whisky
the
Directory,
Scotch Whisky
which
Directory.
was a failure. I had assumed that lots of people who liked whisky would want to have an objective assessment of all readily available whiskies. And I had a very good time writing it, because this I did in a porter cabin next to Grantham Harbour when I was rebuilding my boat. And the Scotch Whisky Research Institute was terribly helpful, and we drew up a form of bar chart which tells you at a glance what whisky is going to taste like. But it was never a publishing success. And it seems that most people don't actually want an objective whisky. That doesn't surprise me.
Well, I can recommend all the books. I did try the Star Drive, about, well, we won't get into that. It's not whiskey related.
No, and
I think you need more of a technical mind than I possess
yes,
to get the most out of that one. But
yes,
it's a fascinating
it's slightly
story.
difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Question 10. How many years was Pip out in the cold after leaving the Scotch Malt Whisky Society? Out in the cold refers, as you've written
Yes.
in your new chapter in the book, about the period where you'd left the society under less than pleasant circumstances, I think we can safely say. And then we made contact with you, and you reconnected with the society.
Well,
but how many years?
1995 that they chucked me out,
Right. So
and it was what?
don't give it away just yet. We'll see if the super fans know. How many years were you out in the cold? Was it A 12, B 18, C 23, or D 30? So that's a tricky one. And we're getting some different answers. Well, yeah, take your pick. But the correct answer is 23 years. Yeah. From leaving in 1995. And then we reconnected in 2018 when the society was celebrating its 35th anniversary. And that's when you came back in. Right. Okay. Wow. Okay. That is a kind of a snapshot of some of the whiskey related adventures from over the years. That, you know, these stories are in the book, and there's much more that's in the book. But that's a wee snapshot of what's in there. Thank you, everyone, for having a go at that. I don't know how many of you get 10 out of 10 or who the super fan really is, but well done for giving it a go. Well, one reminder, we have got 5 copies of Pip's book that will be signed this evening, and we're going to give them away. So if you've not entered the competition yet, get your name and membership number emailed over to unfiltered@smws.com to enter that competition, and we'll make the draw on Monday and let you know if you have been successful. Okay, we're running out of time a wee bit, Pip, but thank you very much for coming along. I should say that Pip will be appearing at Bath Street, our Glasgow members' room in the centre of Glasgow, on the evening of Thursday, the 24th of August. After that, you're heading off on a US book tour, where I think amongst the dates, you're going to be at the Jack Rose Dining Saloon in Washington, D.C. That's on the 19th of September. You're heading across to San Francisco to another partner bar, or bar we've got a relationship with, called Wingtip in San Francisco. That's on the 21st of September.
There was a New York gig before that.
There's a New York gig as well. And then I think we're going to have something at Greville Street, our members' room in London, probably in early October. Watch this space. That's coming up. I should say you can read more about Maverick, the Founder's Tale, in the most recent edition of Unfiltered, the members magazine for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. That's online, so check that out. And get your book online, smws.com if you're in the UK, but check your local branch for how to get hold of your own copy. And for anyone who's not a member of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society yet, I don't know why you're wasting your time. Get onto your website and sign up now. So thank you for your time tonight,
It's a pleasure, as always.
It's been great to hear some of the stories, and thanks to everyone for tuning in tonight. It's been fantastic to see so many of you coming along. So hope to see you soon at one of our members' rooms, or we'll see you online. And that's us for tonight. Bye.